After some consideration, I decided that I wanted to take part in the Has Steve Read It Season 2 BookTube Challenge. I'm going to give some brief background on what that is, just in case anyone is not familiar, and then I'll jump in with my picks. So, Steve Donahue is a man who probably needs no introduction, at least not in BookTube circles. And yet, my experience on the internet has been that you can never take any piece of knowledge for granted. You never know who's going to be watching your video or who might stumble across it. So, let me give maybe a brief introduction here. Steve Donahue is a fascinating booktuber because he has read everything. He remembers absolutely everything he reads. He has strong opinions on everything he reads, and he can speak well. He turns on the camera, he doesn't script his videos, but he's always a very engaging speaker to listen to. So, I have, since I discovered his channel 2 or 3 years ago, spent a lot of time watching his videos, probably more time than I'd care to admit. He posts a lot of videos, several videos a day often, certainly several videos a week. So I'm not what you would call a Steve Donahue completist, meaning I don't post everything he watches, but I watch a lot of it. I dip in and out of his videos quite frequently. I mention I'm not a completist because the nature of this challenge is going to leave myself open to some embarrassment if I mention a book that he's already vlogged about or something like that, but that's a risk I'm going to have to take. Anyways, there's a challenge going around BookTube. This is actually the Season 2 because it went around last year, but it's the Has Steve Read It Challenge. So the idea is that Steve Donahue has read absolutely everything, so can you find some books on your shelf that Steve actually hasn't read? There are some ground rules, and the ground rules seem to differ a little bit from person to person, meaning each participant is making up their slight variation of the ground rules. But I'm going to go with the following. First of all, the 8-book minimum. Rule number 1, the 8-book minimum seems to be pretty popular. Minimum, what am I saying? Maximum. 8-book maximum. 8 books. Now, there's another rule which is nothing obscure. This is a needle that's a little bit difficult to thread because it's got to be at least somewhat obscure. Or Steve would have already read it. There's no chance that he hasn't read it if it's not at least somewhat obscure. But there's got to be at least a chance of him having read it. So, different people are coming up with their own interpretations of this, but for me, what I'm going to read this to mean is I'm going to limit myself to history and fiction. On this channel, I talk a lot about linguistic books or books about teaching English as a second language, my day job, and all of those books are out because it's not Steve's area of interest. I think anything history or fiction related is fair game. We'll see whether Steve agrees with that or not. Also, I've nothing from an independent press. It's got to be from a mainstream publisher. I've also decided that university presses I'm going to not count. It's got to be something published for the mass public. And I'm going to limit myself to 1 book per topic. So for example, there are a few topics where I've read a lot, and I'm only going to select 1 book from each of those topics. Sorry, I'm filming this video late at night, as I usually do, because late at night is the only time I get any time to myself in this apartment. Okay, a couple more things by introduction. A lot of people who have been filming this this challenge have been using their own bookshelf as the pool to draw from. I'm going to do something slightly different. I have not had the opportunity to build up a bookshelf because I've been moving so much in my life. And every time I move, I've got to get rid of all the books I've obtained, especially whenever I move countries. You can't take books with you. They cost way too much to ship. But what I have done over the years is I've maintained all the books I've read since 2006 on this index here on the blog. Every book I've read since 2006 I've reviewed on the blog and kept an index of. So this will be what I'm drawing from, not the physical books in my apartment right now, but the books I've reviewed over the past 15 years on this blog. And you can tell already that the camera angle for this video is me just holding the camera and pointing it at the computer, and that's to make up for the fact that I don't have a lot of books to hold up in front of the camera. Hopefully this will result in something that's watchable. I've done this in the past, and I think the computer screen shows up on the camera fairly well. If it doesn't, just ignore the visual and just listen to the voice, I guess. Minimize the screen or don't watch the video, whatever. So, yes, I think that's all the preliminaries. I'm going to try and go with my picks. So the first pick is actually something I still have in my apartment. Frozen, Heart of Dread, Frozen, which is book 1 in the series by Melissa de la Cruz and Michael Johnston. This was a mass market paperback, which was put in a lot of bookstores, and New York Times bestselling author. So there's a good chance Steve has read it, as with everything on this list. But it's also a fairly forgettable YA book. And I don't think Steve reads everything YA that comes out. I'm sure he reads a lot of it. But there's a good chance he may have missed this. Okay, so that's my YA book. I've used that up. No more YAs. The rest will be different categories. Next, Turn Right at Istanbul by Tony Wright. Subtitle, A Walk on the Galapagos Peninsula. This is a book I picked up when I was living in Australia. A place Steve has never been to, I believe. Which increases my chances that he's not read it. And it's a book that's by an Australian author aimed at an Australian audience, talking about the significance of the Gallipoli campaign and Anzac Day. It's part travelogue and part history. I'm counting this as a history book and thus saying it's fair game. I mean, you never know. Steve might well have read it, but I'm not sure this book ever got released widely outside of Australia. I got it from the University of Melbourne Library. I would never have come across it if I hadn't been in Australia. Okay, next. Way of the Kings by Andre Malraux. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sure Steve has read the famous books by Andre Malraux. The Fate of Man. Well, The Fate of Man is actually the only one that comes to my mind. I'm sure Steve knows him better than I do. But this, I believe, is one of his lesser-known books. And the only reason I came across this book is because I was living in Cambodia. And it was being republished and sold in Cambodian shops. This is one of his earlier books and is a partly fictionalized account. Mostly fictionalized account, but it's based on his real-life experience trying to loot relics from the Cambodian jungle. So that was how I came across it. Andre Malraux had actually lived in Cambodia for a time. He had an apartment in Phnom Penh, which I believe is still standing. And this is a book he wrote based on his Cambodian experience, which I don't believe is nearly as famous as his other books. That being said, Steve has probably read this because, you know, with the big name authors, he tends to read everything they wrote. But it's worth a shot. Okay, next, The Regime by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. This is part of the Left Behind series, which I'm sure Steve has read some of, but I'm not sure if he has read all of them. And this is actually one of the prequel books to the Left Behind series. There were 3 prequels published. This was the second prequel book to the Left Behind series. And it's terrible. So, you know, there's no reason Steve would read this for enjoyment's sake, certainly. I can't imagine that I'm sure he's read some books in the series just because it's, you know, his profession to be on top of this stuff, and it was a big deal in its time, publishing-wise. But I don't think he would have stuck around all the way to the prequel series. So, next, The Insurrectionist by Jules Valles. Apologies for mispronouncing all the French names. It's probably pronounced Val or something. So, Jules Valles was one of the participants in the Paris Commune, and in fact, he had a post in the Paris Commune. What was it? The Ministry of Art or something like that. And then after the Paris Commune, he wrote a series of roman à clef books describing his life. And this is the 3rd one in the series, The Insurrectionist. Now, the picture I have here is actually a picture of the French version, because I searched Google Images back in 2007 and couldn't find on the internet at the time, back in 2007, could not find a picture of the English translation. The book, I am told, or led to believe by my internet research, even in its native France, goes in and out of popularity. It was forgotten for many years. Jules Valles came back into fashion during the 1968 uprisings in Paris. It was popular for a few years after that, and then went out of fashion again in France, I believe. It was translated into English. At least a copy I managed to track down was, I believe, published in the 1970s, and I'm not sure it's been in print in English since then. Nevertheless, I think this is a legitimate book because it's a classic of sorts, and it's a memoir of the Paris Commune, although it's been a debate ever since it was published how much of it is based on his real memories and how much of it is fictionalized. So that's my next entry. Then, Tales of Greece and Troy by Andrew Lang. Now, as you can see, maybe here, this is marked as a Wordsworth Classics. And, right, I know, you think I'm crazy for putting anything classic on the Has Steve Read It challenge, and I probably am. He's probably read this. But this seemed to be, as far as I could tell, a minor classic. It didn't even have its own Wikipedia entry. I mean, Andrew Lang had his own Wikipedia entry, but not this book. It's a retelling of classic Greek mythology stories that we're all very familiar with, especially Steve. So he may well have felt no need to read a book like this. Plus, it's not very... Well, it'd be interesting to see what Steve thinks about it. I thought the narration style was actually good. It was well written. But I was irritated by what seemed to me to be a lot of mistakes and inconsistencies in it, which would cause me to classify it as maybe not all that great of a classic. So possibly something that Steve hasn't gotten around to. we'll see. Okay, next. Crisis on Infinite Earths by Marv Wolfman. Now, this is not the comic. I know he's read the comic. This is the novelization of the comic. Also by Marv Wolfman, who was the same person who did the comic. So, he's read the comic. Has he read the novelization of Crisis on Infinite Earths? Okay, last one. Bakunin, an Invention by Horst Bienek. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably not. So this is, Horst Bienek is a German guy, West German. This was translated into English. It's about an aging radical in Germany who's writing a biography of Bakunin. And it's a fiction book. So it's a fiction book about somebody writing a biography about Bakunin. It just describes his struggle to write the biography. I tracked this down some years ago when I was going through my Bakunin phase. I was looking for historical fiction about Bakunin, and this was the only thing I could find. Got it off of Amazon. You know, I think it's a fair game to count this in the challenge. It's a real book. It is fiction and literature and history-esque, but I think this is pretty obscure. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's read it. He's probably read it. Okay, and those are my 8 choices. So, I'm going to post this up onto YouTube, and then I actually don't know how one goes around getting this video to Steve's attention. I guess I'll send him an email or something. He leaves his email in the description of every video he makes. Because I don't believe Steve is a regular watcher of this channel. And to be quite honest, that's probably just as well, because a while back Steve made a video about all the things that YouTubers do that bug him. And I am a repeat offender on many of the accounts that irritate him. I will often have something to drink while I'm filming the videos in case my voice gets hoarse. Which bugs him when people eat and drink on the videos. I will frequently mispronounce authors' names, don't do enough research about the pronunciation of the names before the videos start. I'll often be unorganized at the start of my videos. Just all the things that bug him about disorganized booktube videos, I'm a repeat offender on. So, obviously I'm going to have to get this video to his attention in order to get him to respond to it. But then after that, Steve, if you're listening to this, you are under no obligation to continue watching any content on this channel. It will probably drive you nuts. Also, I should mention that there is a distinct possibility that this will never get a response, because he was mentioning on the last response he did that the backlog for these is coming in pretty fast. In other words, a lot of people are taking part in this challenge. So who knows? Maybe this will get missed. But I thought it was a chance worth taking, because I just wanted to. I thought it seemed like a fun challenge, and if he does respond to this, I'd be curious what his takes are. Part of the fun with this is not so much winning the challenge, because you can never win the challenge. He's read everything. But the fun is just getting him to comment on the various books that you selected. And we'll see if he has any interesting comments on any of them. Okay.